thanks to the Bernie Sanders campaign, and I want to give a big thank you here to everyone who has been involved in the Bernie movement. You want to just raise your hand and just give you a big thank you. I want to thank you for making this incredible handoff possible, because when Bernie went and endorsed Hillary, it was as if he had a subliminal message. And that subliminal message was, I don't really mean it. And that seems to have been the effect of his endorsement, because it absolutely opened the floodgates. And our Facebook has completely blown up. So much so, in fact, that Facebook had to shut down inviting your friends because we're growing too fast, apparently. It just feels like, look out world, here we come, hold on to your hat. This is a completely unprecedented moment. We've kind of hit the breaking point in so many ways. The breaking point on student debt, the breaking point on the cost of health care, the breaking point on the lousy jobs that have come back. They tell us we're in a recovery, but we know better. This is really an emergency. It's no recovery. Anybody think it's a recovery out there? No, we got an emergency and we're going to fix it. And what was the first action of Barack Obama? A Democratic White House with 2 Democratic houses of Congress. The very first action was appointing none other but Larry Summers, the architect of the economic crash and catastrophe, to be Secretary of the Treasury. And then they went on and bailed out Wall Street to the tune of now 16 trillion, but who's counting? And what we say is, if we canceled the debt for the crooks on Wall Street who crashed the economy, how about we cancel the debt for the students who are the victims of that race fraud? And we can do that, and I'm going to tell you how we do that in a minute, because as far as I'm concerned, when we turn the White House into a greenhouse and make the world a better place, the very first action that I would take as president, if I have the honor to serve, is to cancel that student debt. And it doesn't have to go through Congress. This is something the president can do simply through the power of appointment. The president appoints the chair of the Federal Reserve, and if you are a geek about these things and you're really into the weeds of policy, quantitative easing is actually decided by the Federal Reserve. So, and I don't mean to spill all the good news at once, but it turns out the number of people who are held hostage by student debt. Anybody know anyone in student debt? Anytime you are doubtful about winning this election, go talk to someone who's in debt. And if you keep doing that, there are 42 million people who are trapped in student loan debt, and here it comes. 42 million is a winning plurality. It's a winning section of the presidential vote. So just by mobilizing people to come out and cancel their debt, we can actually take over this election and win it. All right. To put an end to student debt. They don't want you to know that. They don't want you to know how powerful we are. And that this isn't just sort of theoretical power. This is power to do something that's absolutely life-changing and that's absolutely critical if we are to survive as a society. Because what society throughout history and all around the world has ever survived by devouring its younger generation? But that's what's going on right now. Young people are being devoured by a predatory economy. So when we take over, and we have the power to do that, just by friends telling friends, you cannot stay home in debt on November 8th of 2016. Everybody come out and vote and bring a family member, a sympathetic family member, and then we have enough votes not only to win a 3-way race, but then we have enough votes actually to win a 2-way race. And there will be no stopping us if we actually get the word out. And I happen to know no one is better equipped to get that word out than millennials, who are the master of social media and internet communications. So no pressure, but you got the world in your hands, and you really do, because you have the skills to completely do a 180 on where we are. And by bringing out that force to cancel student debt, we also bring out a generation that has really been educated on the ground by this predatory economy and by this predatory political system. So we have an agenda. And that agenda is not only to cancel student debt, it's also to make public higher education free, as it should be. There is no excuse not to make it free, because for every dollar that we put into free higher education, that is as taxpayers, we actually get back $7 in return. So this does not cost us. This actually benefits us as a society. And the only possible explanation for why we are not doing this is because this predatory economy has identified millennials as the latest cash cow that is being squeezed on all fronts for profiteering. Who is it that has always led transformative change throughout history? Whether we're talking the civil rights movement, or bringing the troops home from Vietnam, or the women's movement, or the anti-sweatshop movement, or the climate change movement, and who shut down the Keystone Pipeline? This has always been the work of the younger generation to enact transformative change. So again, no pressure, but this is why we need to unleash the power that we have to actually move forward through our democracy. We're going to stop this epidemic of police violence and racism, which has really got everybody in the crosshairs right now. We're going to put an end to that. It's blowing back at police as well, as we've seen in the tragic events this weekend in Baton Rouge and in Dallas before that. It's absolutely tragic. And, the Black Lives Matter movement is a non-violent movement. These are largely distressed soldiers who've come back and committed these horrific acts. We should not be stressing. We should not be sending our men and women into these battles that should not be fought and that cannot be won in the first place. We should not be producing stressed and deranged soldiers who come home without support and without real treatment for the devastation that they have been a part of. That is the key problem. We have an epidemic of violence, and that is an epidemic of violence in this country and an epidemic of violence around the world. And we Greens, we have been all about solutions to stop violence and to provide nonviolent solutions, which we have right now. So we call for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission here in the U.S. so we can get down to the bottom of the living legacy of slavery and its expression in racism, not just in police violence, but in economic violence, where the average African American family now has 5 cents on the dollar of a Caucasian family because of the historic bias, discrimination, disinvestment, redlining, you name it, that has the breakdown of public education because these schools have been disinvested in communities of color. These are problems we need to tackle, and we need to tackle in a comprehensive and holistic way. And the really good news is, if we stop bombing black and brown people in other countries around the world, like in Afghanistan and like in Syria, if we stop these wars for oil, which are also called the war on terror, which only creates more terror, if we stop these crazy and catastrophic wars, we will be safer, the world will be safer, and we will have hundreds of billions of dollars every year to put into true security here at home. building the housing that we need, investing in the schools we deserve, creating the health care that we need. Another thing we can do is take back our schools so that they actually support real teaching to the whole student for lifetime learning, not to a high-stakes test, which is the opposite of real learning, and which is actually harmful to the challenged learners, the challenged students who were supposed to get the benefit of education reform, but actually the hammer is coming down on them. And whose schools are being closed by this policy? It's the schools, the poor schools, the schools in the communities of color, and these kids are having their community network and their community institutions really broken up out from under them. They then have to commute to another poor school where in fact the educational outcomes are no better than what they were to start with. This has been essentially cover for privatizing our public school system and turning it over to a private charter corporate school industry. And the biggest obstacle to education is actually poverty. We can actually eliminate poverty by reviving our economy, creating a just economy, and we have a plan for this. It's like the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression, except in this case, it's a Green New Deal, so it not only solves the emergency of the jobs crisis, it also solves the emergency of the climate crisis. And the way that it does this is by creating 20 million jobs on an emergency basis. That's enough jobs to put everyone to work in a good wage, full-time job that transforms our economy on an emergency basis to 100% clean renewable energy by 2030. The other piece of this is a healthy food system, a healthy, local, sustainable food system. That's where we need to put our dollars, not into this corporate industrial poisonous food system, because that food system is not only bad for the planet, it's a big source of the carbon emissions, transporting this food all around the world and growing it through an industrial system that uses pesticides and fertilizer that are all part of the carbon cycle. They produce CO2 emissions, and it requires tractors and big equipment. Instead, we say, let's put people to work. We can put lots of people to work and pay them well as farmers and redirect our subsidies so they're not going to the big corporate America, they're going to America's farming families and to farming cooperatives and to farming communities. So this is the system that not only revives our economy and it prevents climate catastrophe, it also makes the friggin' wars for oil obsolete. We don't need them anymore. People often say, oh, people make bad choices. Well, we're not given very many choices, and all the wrong choices are subsidized. So we're going to put the money into the right choices, which are right not only for the planet, which are right not only for international peace and tranquility, but are also the right thing for our health. This is what real health looks like. A healthy food system, and a healthy transportation system, and a healthy energy system. But on the immigration crisis, number one, we must remember that it is immigrants who've always been the source of diversity and of strength and of creativity and productivity in our economies, our culture, and our communities. So we call for a welcoming path to citizenship for the immigrants who are at the backbone of our society. So we say to Donald Trump, we don't need no friggin' wall. We just have to stop invading other countries. Trump talks talks about, Hillary has already done. We have to stop supporting that corporate coup in Honduras, and we have to make sure Hillary Clinton is not put in a position of creating more such corporate coups around the world.
Yeah.
So one last word about foreign policy, because we can't ignore this elephant in the room. And until our campaign sort of got a word in edgewise in this conversation, there was no real discussion about the catastrophe of U.S. foreign policy. And that's, we've had these wars since 9/11 and the trade towers. We've had these wars on terror. And in fact, they just create more terror. Even the head of the NSA the other day, like last week, said, "Oh my goodness, it's not working. ISIS is even worse than Al-Qaeda, and Al-Qaeda is worse than the Taliban." And where did all this start anyhow? In Afghanistan. And who started it? The CIA and the Saudis created the jihadi thing. Did this help us? I don't think so. Every existing terrorist movement has become bigger, has more territory, has become more vicious because of this strategy. So we say we need a new kind of offensive in the Middle East. It's called a peace offensive. And it starts with a weapons embargo to the Middle East. Because we are supplying the majority of weapons to all partisans, to all combatants in this problem. It's not just in the Middle East, it's all over the world. We are the major, in Martin Luther King's words, the major proponent of violence around the world, and we are the major proponent of weapon sales into everybody's hands. If you look at U.S. foreign policy, it doesn't make any sense. We are not benefiting. Our allies, supposedly, are not benefiting. Who is benefiting? Only one party is benefiting. That is the war profiteers, the weapons manufacturers. Our foreign policy is essentially a marketing strategy for the war industry, and we need to shut that down.
Yeah.
Because what has it produced, this strategy? Failed states, that's what we've gotten for our wars. Failed states, mass refugee migrations, 65 million people. This is an all-out crisis, which is not only horrific for these countries, but it's tearing apart Europe and the Middle East themselves, and it produces worse terrorist threats. So why do more of this? I mean, how can they get away with this preposterous proposition that we just have another cycle of violence in Syria and beyond? And Hillary Clinton, for her part, she wants to start an air war over Syria by creating a no-fly zone, which means confronting a nuclear power, which is Russia, and we know where that can go very quickly. In the Middle East, we need this peace offensive, which is essentially a weapons embargo, and it also means freezing the bank accounts of those countries that are continuing to fund the jihadi terrorist movement. And Hillary herself said in a leaked State Department memo that it is in fact the Saudis who are still the major funder of jihadi terror all around the world. Hillary said this herself. So we have the power to actually stop these wars and create this peace offensive and do the right thing in the Middle East and around the world, and to create a foreign policy that is based on international law and human rights. That should be the foundation of our foreign policy, not the sale of weapons on behalf of the war industry. So it's 54% military, and then it's a bunch of other little footnotes around it. We have essentially a military budget that is making us more endangered, not more safe. So this is how, ironically, this is how we can have a sustainable, just, and peaceful future, is by cutting that military budget ending these entanglements that create war, chaos, and poverty and misery around the world, and instead putting those dollars into those things that we need here at home and helping other countries also make this transition. So instead of creating this forced competition where we feel like we have to be at war with each other, we could actually be collaborating so that all of us demilitarize and put our resources into the true threat to all of us, which is climate change. Our economy is global, our resources are global, our climate is global. We need to be creating collaborative global solutions at the same time that we are creating solutions for in America. So we can make this work for all of us. And there are solutions. And we have the numbers, remember, to make this happen. So this is a win-win-win just waiting to be enacted. But in order to enact it, it means resisting the propaganda and standing up and voting for what we believe, not against what we fear. Because that... I'm sure you're hearing about that, about, you know, how dare you think about voting for a third party. Anybody hearing that these days? A little bit of that out there? Yeah, they are trying to beat that drum. You know, but by telling us, you know, to do this politics of fear, well, that's what we've been doing, right? I mean, people have been told to be good little boys and girls here for quite a while. Don't step outside the system. You got to vote for the lesser evil. But all those reasons, thank you, all those reasons you were told to vote for the lesser evil, you know, like what? Like because you didn't want the massive bailouts for Wall Street. Well, because you didn't want the meltdown of the climate. Well, because you didn't want the expanding wars. You didn't want the attack on our civil liberties and on our privacy and on the internet. And you didn't want the expanding police and prison complex. You didn't want expanding student debt. That's exactly what we've gotten. So when people tell you you have to vote, you know, your fears, just say back to them that this politics of fear brought us everything we were afraid of. All the reasons we were told that you had to vote against it, all those things are what we've actually got. So we say it's time to forget the lesser evil and to fight for the greater good. We are, you know, in this historic moment where we can turn this breaking point that we face into a tipping point that we need to take back the promise of democracy and the peaceful, just, green future that is within our reach. We have the power to create the America and the world that works for all of us. The power to do that is not just in our hopes, it's not just in our dreams. Right here and now, in this room, that power is in our hands. Let's make it so. Together we are unstoppable. Thank you.